Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Fort Macon State Park. We're continuing our Cannon Day observance by firing one of the fort's large guns here. And I'll tell you about this in just a second. You have to remember that in military sites and forts and things like this, if you go travel around, you may see these old cannons and so forth. And it's hard to just think of them more than just props. Well, they are actual military weapons. They were very deadly and they were used in combat. So they're more than just a prop. They're actual weapons that were used in warfare. How did they work? That is what our Cannon Day presentations are all about, to show you how these old cannons worked, how they were used, loaded and fired and all that. So this particular cannon we're going to shoot here momentarily is one of the fort's large cannons. You had large seacoast cannons that most forts were armed with, and here you see some of them. This particular cannon is known as a Model 1841 Navy 32-pounder. That's a mouthful. Navy 32-pounder. It's called a 32-pounder because it fired a cannonball that weighed 32 pounds, exactly. It is a medium seacoast weapon and is of a type that was used here at Fort Macon. When Fort Macon was in use in the 1800s, 1860s, there were 18 of these things in Fort Macon that were smoothbore and 4 that were rifled. Excuse me. And as a weapon, a 32-pounder can fire a 32-pound ball at a range of 1,756 yards. That is 4 yards short of a mile. Well, how far is that exactly? Well, if you can look out over here across Beaufort Inlet, you'll see an island on the other side over there. That is Shackleford Banks. It is part of the Cape Lookout National Seashore. And from here to that island, the range is just over a mile. So in other words, this cannon could fire a 32-pound ball and almost hit the beach on the opposite side of the inlet. Of course, if enemy ships were coming through into the harbor, they would be midway between the inlet there. You see a small boat going out. If that was an enemy ship that was coming in, of course, we would open fire and blow him out of the water very quickly. So these guns are meant to guard the harbor entrance out here, Beaufort Inlet, and keep enemy warships out, keep them from ever coming in. 32-pounder, range about a mile. Okay, we had other guns in Fort Macon that could shoot even further than that. Down here, you folks way back in the back over there are near what is known as a rifled 32-pounder. It had a range of up to 5 miles. And then the large gun at the top of the steps here, the man in blue standing there, that is an 8-inch Columbiad that had a range of 2.7 miles. So in other words, that one could fire a 65-pound ball all the way across the inlet and hit 1.5 miles inland on that island over there. So Fort Macon had some pretty cool stuff back in the days. Even though these cannons are mostly replicas, they are still functional replicas, just happen to be modern made rather than made back in the 1860s and everything. The cannon crew you see here is the typical cannon crew for one of these things. And what they are doing is the same thing that soldiers would have done back in the 1860s to use a cannon like this. They're going by the same drill manuals and so forth that soldiers learned by. You have 4 cannoneers and a gunner, 4 cannoneers on either side. The gunner is in charge. He's standing on the piece. And the 2 front men are responsible for loading the cannon. Remember, these are muzzle-loaded weapons. Everything's inserted in the muzzle, rammed down, and then fired back out. The 2 other men assist them, and the number 3 cannoneer on this far side over here is the one that actually fires the cannon. More on that later. But anyway, what these guys have done is to roll the cannon out of battery. Now, this is the loading position. Out of battery. Remember, they're muzzle loaded, so you roll the cannon back to the rear to be able to load it. And the reason you do this is because you roll it to the rear, you can remain under cover behind the wall to load it. If we didn't roll it to the rear, you would have to stand on the wall to load it, and that wouldn't be good in battle. The enemy would shoot you down. So you roll it to the rear so you can remain behind the wall, behind cover to load it. Then, what we're going to do in a few moments, the cannon will be loaded, the command will be load, They will take the powder bag, insert it in the muzzle, and then number 1 and 2 will ram it down with an implement called a rammer. Now, are we going to really fire a cannonball out of this thing? No, I'm sorry. I know you're disappointed. I am too, but folks, it's just too much paperwork for me to do that. You have to remember, we got some people out there peacefully sitting on the beach over there, and some little people in boats out there, and Shackleford Banks way beyond, and I'm sure they would take kind of a dim view of us firing real cannonballs out there. So no, we're just firing a gunpowder charge. Daggone it, I know. Maybe one day, but not today. Anyway, what we're going to do is fire a 3-pound gunpowder charge out of this thing. That is half of a normal combat load for this cannon. In other words, this cannon back in the day in combat would actually use a 6-pound gunpowder charge with a 32-pound ball. So we're just using a half charge of 3 pounds. When the command load is given, they will put the powder bag in, ram it down. Then the command will be in battery, at which point the gun crew will roll the cannon forward to the front. That is the firing position. The next command will be point. That's the aiming command. The gunner will be sighting the piece. 2 of the cannoneers will come with long hand spikes, as they're called, and move the gun carriage back or forth on the gunner's command to bring the muzzle on target where he wants to aim it. The next command will be ready. And at that time, the number 3 cannoneer will pass a primer called a friction primer up to the gunner, who will insert the primer in the hole on top of the cannon. Now, you've probably seen enough movies that you know that these old cannons have a little hole back there on the top. He's putting the priming wire in. That's called the vent. And the primer goes in the vent. And this is different from probably what most of you are familiar with. Because in the movies, when you have an old-timey cannon like this being fired, don't you always see them firing it with a little fuse or a wick thing sticking out of the top? And you stand there with your box of matches or your Bic lighter. Yeah, they had this back then, didn't they? Or if you're Clint Eastwood, of course, in the movies, you would use your cigar and light the fuse and psst, boom, the cannon fires. Is that how it's really done? No. My friends, that is Hollywood. Cannons in this period are not fired like that. They are fired with a detonator called a friction primer. The primer is a copper tube full of gunpowder and a composition like what you have on the head of a match. It is explosive. This little primer thing is inserted in the hole on top of the cannon the gunner just showed you. Attached to the primer will be a firing cord called the lanyard. The number 3 cannoneer will have a hold of the lanyard. When the command fire is given, he will pull the lanyard. It rips the ring out of the primer explodes, and that in turn detonates the powder bag instantly. Boom, cannon fires. That is how these cannons are fired, not with a fuse or a wick like you see in Hollywood movies. That's incorrect. Yeah. Okay, so you see you learned something today. Cool. All right, we're about to continue on now, and you will watch the gunner and the cannon crew go through these steps: load, in battery, point, ready, and then the fire command will be given as soon as we have a clear firing range out there. So, are we all ready to see a 32-pounder fire? All right. Oh! In battery. Shot. Heat. That was a 32-pounder being fired with half a powder charge and no cannonball. Imagine what it must have been like in the Battle of Fort Macon, where you had about 50 of these things firing. Wow. Folks, we're going to continue on with our Cannon Day observance. At 2:30, we'll be firing one of the 10-inch mortars down here in the parade ground. That is a